Everything seemed broken and crumbling, an abandoned adobe structure in the New Mexico desert, its mud walls eroding back into the earth from which they came. But within those fragile walls was something that had survived against impossible odds, waiting for the right person to discover it at exactly the right moment. 8-year-old Elijah Carter had been walking through the high desert outside Santa Fe for most of the day. His small feet blistered in shoes, 2 sizes too small. His lips cracked from dehydration, despite the water bottle he'd stolen from the group home. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, turning the landscape into a shimmering dreamscape of sand, sage, and distant mesas that looked like they'd been painted onto the impossible blue sky. He wasn't running toward anything. He was just running away from the group home where the staff were overworked and indifferent, away from the older boys who took his food and pushed him around, away from the social worker who kept promising things would get better, but never did anything to make that true. Elijah had been in the system for 2 years, ever since his grandmother died, and there was no one else to take him. In that time, he'd learned that promises from adults were just words, that safety was temporary, and that being small and quiet was the best strategy for survival. But being small and quiet didn't protect you from the desert heat. It didn't fill your empty stomach or heal your blistered feet, or tell you where to go when you had nowhere left to run. The mud house appeared like a mirage in the late afternoon light. At first, Elijah thought it was just another rock formation, one of the strange shapes the desert created through erosion and time. But as he got closer, he could see the straight lines, the deliberate angles, the square opening that had once been a doorway. It was small, maybe 12 feet by 12 feet, and in terrible condition. The flat roof had partially collapsed, leaving wooden beams exposed to the sky. The mud brick walls were crumbling, with chunks missing where rain and wind had slowly dissolved the adobe back into earth. The doorway had no door, just an opening that led into shadow and the promise of shelter from the relentless sun. Elijah approached cautiously, watching for snakes or other animals that might have claimed the ruin as territory. But there was nothing except the wind moving through the sage and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. If you enjoy rural mystery stories about forgotten children and shocking discoveries, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, because this story will hold you from the very first moment. He stepped through the doorway into blessed shade. The interior was cooler by maybe 10 degrees, enough to feel like salvation after hours in the sun. The floor was packed earth, scattered with debris, dried leaves, broken pottery, what looked like old wood that had rotted and dried into fragments. Part of the roof was still intact, creating pockets of deeper shade where Elijah could rest without being fully exposed to the elements. He collapsed in the coolest corner, his body shaking with exhaustion. He drank the last of his water, knowing he'd need to find more soon, but too tired to worry about it yet. He ate one of the 2 granola bars he'd taken from the group home kitchen, saving the other for later. Then he just sat, letting his body recover, trying not to think about what would happen next. It was while sitting in that corner, his back against the crumbling mud wall, that Elijah noticed something odd. The wall behind him felt different. Not rough adobe, but smooth, like it had been plastered or covered. He turned to look more closely. Someone had created a small niche in the wall, about a foot square, and covered it with mud plaster that had been smoothed and painted. The paint had mostly faded away, but Elijah could still make out traces of color, red and yellow and black, geometric patterns that looked deliberate and meaningful. And in the center of the niche, hidden behind a thin layer of mud that had cracked with age, was something that glinted in the dim light. Elijah's survival instinct warred with his curiosity. "Leave it alone," one part of his brain said. "It's probably nothing, and messing with it could be dangerous." But another part, the part that had kept him alive in group homes and foster placements by noticing things other people missed, said, "Look, see what's there. Knowledge is survival." He carefully picked at the cracked mud covering, pulling away small pieces until he could see what was underneath. It was metal, a small tin box, maybe 6 inches long and 4 inches wide, its surface decorated with faded images of flowers and birds, the kind of box that might have held tea or cookies 100 years ago. Elijah pulled the box out of the niche, surprised by its weight. Something was definitely inside. The lid was stuck, sealed by decades of settling mud and desert air. But Elijah worked it carefully until it finally popped open with a small puff of dust. Inside, wrapped in cloth that had once been colorful but was now faded to browns and grays, were papers, letters, photographs, and underneath everything, something small and heavy, wrapped in a separate piece of cloth. With trembling hands, Elijah unwrapped the heavy object first. It was a medal. Military, he thought, though he didn't recognize the specific type. The medal was tarnished but still intact, hanging from a faded ribbon. On one side was an eagle. On the other, engraved in small letters, C.P.L. Samuel Carter, 369th Infantry Regiment, 1918. Carter, his last name. Elijah's heart began to pound. He carefully unfolded the letters, trying to read them in the dim light. They were written in careful, educated handwriting, dated between 1917 and 1919. Letters from Samuel Carter to his wife Rosa, written from training camps in America and battlefields in France. Letters describing the experience of being a black soldier in World War I, serving in the famous Harlem Hellfighters Regiment, fighting for a country that didn't treat him as a full citizen. And then, a final letter, different from the others. This one was written by Rosa Carter in 1920, addressed to whoever may find these treasures. My husband Samuel died in 1919, not from battle wounds but from the influenza that killed so many after the war. Before he died, he asked me to keep his letters and his medal safe, to make sure our children and grandchildren knew he had served with honor, that he had fought for freedom even when he was not free himself. But our children were taken from me, stolen by people who said I could not care for them alone, that a black widow woman could not raise children properly. They scattered my babies to different places, and I do not know where they went or what names they were given. I hide these letters in our home, in the niche Samuel built with his own hands, hoping that someday one of my grandchildren or great-grandchildren might find their way back here, might discover that they come from a soldier, a hero, a man who believed in dignity and honor even when the world denied him both. If you are reading this and you bear the name Carter, know that you come from warriors and survivors. Know that you matter. Rosa Carter, April 1920. Elijah read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down his dusty face. Samuel and Rosa Carter. His last name. His people, maybe. He thought about his grandmother, who had died when he was 6. She had been a Carter. She had told him stories about ancestors who were soldiers and builders. But Elijah had been too young to remember the details. She had died before she could teach him his full family history. But maybe this was it. Maybe he had found his way back to the beginning of his family's story. He looked through the photographs, faded images showing a black man in a military uniform, standing proud despite segregation and discrimination. Images of a woman, her face serious but kind, standing in front of this very house when it was new. Images of children, 2 boys and a girl, their faces young and hopeful. They scattered my babies to different places, Rosa had written. Lost children, lost family, just like Elijah. The sound of vehicles in the distance made Elijah freeze. Engines, multiple vehicles. The group home staff, probably, searching for him. Or maybe police. Either way, adults who would take him back to places he didn't want to be, who would tell him this was for his own good, who would never understand why he'd rather risk dying in the desert than go back to being invisible and powerless. Elijah looked at the tin box with Samuel and Rosa's treasures. He looked at the crumbling mud house that had protected these memories for over a century. And he made a decision. He wouldn't hide. He wouldn't run anymore. Instead, he would stand in the doorway of this fragile adobe structure and wait for the adults to arrive. And when they did, he would show them what he'd found. He would tell them about Samuel and Rosa Carter, about lost children and stolen families, about how history repeated itself across generations. Because if Samuel Carter had fought for dignity and honor in the face of a world that tried to deny him both, then Elijah could be brave enough to stand up for himself too. He could fight for the right to be seen, to matter, to be connected to his own history. The vehicles were getting closer, their engines echoing across the desert landscape. Elijah clutched the tin box to his chest and stepped into the doorway, silhouetted against the setting sun, no longer running or hiding but standing firm on ground that his ancestors might have walked. The fragile mud house had given him shelter. But what it had given him inside was so much more valuable than physical refuge. It had given him a name, a history, a reason to believe that he came from people who mattered, who fought, who survived. And that changed everything. The first vehicle to reach the adobe house was a tribal police truck from the nearby pueblo. A pueblo officer, a woman in her 40s with black hair pulled back in a neat braid, got out cautiously, her hand near her radio, but not threatening. "Son, are you all right?" she called out. "We got a call about a missing child from the group home in Santa Fe. They said you might be out here." Elijah didn't move from the doorway. "I'm not going back there." "That's not for me to decide," the officer said gently, moving closer but keeping her distance. "My name is Officer Maria Tafoya. I work with the Santa Clara Pueblo Police. This land," she gestured at the desert around them, "is Pueblo land. And that house you're standing in, that's on the edge of Pueblo territory. So I need to make sure you're safe before we figure out what happens next." A second vehicle arrived, a Santa Fe County Sheriff's SUV. A white male deputy got out, looking hot and irritated. "Is that him?" The runaway from Sunrise Group Home. "His name is Elijah," Officer Tafoya said pointedly. "And yes, this is the child they're looking for. But there's no rush here. Let me talk to him." The deputy looked like he wanted to argue, but apparently thought better of it. Officer Tafoya approached the adobe house slowly, her body language deliberately non-threatening. "Elijah, I need you to listen to me. The sun's going down. The desert gets cold at night. Cold enough to be dangerous, especially for someone your age without proper gear. I'm not saying you have to go back to that group home tonight, but we need to get you somewhere safe. Somewhere with food and water and warmth. Can you understand that?" Elijah nodded slowly. "I found something," he said, his voice quiet but determined. "In the house. Something important." Officer Tafoya's expression shifted from concern to interest. "What did you find?" "A box, with letters and a medal. From World War I, from a soldier named Samuel Carter." Elijah held up the tin box. "That's my last name. Carter, I think." I think he might have been my ancestor, my great-great-grandfather or something. Officer Tafoya climbed the few steps to the doorway, moving slowly so as not to startle Elijah. She looked at the tin box, then at the boy holding it, then back at the box. "Can I see?" she asked gently. Elijah opened the box, showing her the letters and the medal. Officer Tafoya pulled out her phone and used its flashlight to examine the contents more closely. Her eyes widened as she read parts of Rosa's final letter. "Elijah, do you know what this is? This is documentation of black homesteaders in New Mexico, black families who lived here in the early 1900s. There's not a lot of historical record of them. Most of the documentation was lost or destroyed. This could be really important." "But is it mine?" Elijah asked. "If Samuel Carter was my family, do I have a right to these things?" "That's a question for lawyers and historians," Officer Tafoya said, "but morally. If this is your family's legacy, then yes, I think you have every right to it." She looked back at the deputy. "Radio dispatch. Tell them we need someone from the State Historic Preservation Office out here. And tell them to contact Dr. Margaret Williams at the University of New Mexico. She specializes in black homesteader history." "We don't have time for history lessons," the deputy protested. "We need to get this kid back to—" This kid just made a potentially significant historical discovery. Officer Tafoya cut him off. "On Pueblo land, which makes it my jurisdiction. We're doing this right." She turned back to Elijah. "Come sit in my truck where it's cooler. We'll wait for the historian together. And while we wait, you can tell me what happened at the group home that made you run." Elijah hesitated, then climbed into Officer Tafoya's air-conditioned truck, still clutching the tin box. She gave him water and a protein bar from her emergency kit, and he ate slowly while she made more phone calls. "I'm calling Child Protective Services too," she explained to Elijah. "Not to get you in trouble, but because, if you've run away this far into the desert, something at that placement isn't working, and CPS needs to know that." Over the next hour, as the sun set and turned the desert into shades of purple and orange, more people arrived. A CPS supervisor named James Rodriguez, a historian from UNM named Dr. Margaret Williams, a black woman in her 50s who drove up in a dusty Jeep looking excited despite the remote location, and eventually a transport van from the group home with Mr. Stevens, the director, looking angry and embarrassed. "There you are, Elijah," Mr. Stevens said, his voice tight with forced patience. "Do you have any idea how much trouble you've caused? 3 hours of staff time, police resources, all because you decided to throw a tantrum and run away." "It wasn't a tantrum," Elijah said quietly, but Mr. Stevens wasn't listening. "We'll discuss consequences when we get back. Let's go." "Actually," Officer Tafoya interrupted, "Elijah's not going anywhere until we finish documenting what he found and until CPS determines appropriate placement." "He's in my custody," Mr. Stevens protested. "I'm responsible for him, and I'm taking him back to the facility." "Your facility that he's run away from how many times in the past 6 months?" James Rodriguez from CPS asked pointedly. "According to the records I'm looking at, this is his 3rd escape attempt. That suggests the placement isn't appropriate." While the adults argued, Dr. Williams knelt beside Elijah in the truck. "Can I see what you found?" she asked gently. Elijah showed her the contents of the tin box. Dr. Williams handled each item with reverence: the letters, the photographs, the medal, Rosa's final message. Her hands trembled as she read Rosa's words about stolen children and scattered families. "Elijah," she said quietly, "do you understand what you've found? This is documentation of a black family that lived in New Mexico in the early 1900s. We know black families homesteaded in the Southwest. There are census records and land claims. But personal documents like this, first-hand accounts of their experiences, their thoughts, their struggles, those are incredibly rare. Most were lost or destroyed. But were they my family? Elijah asked. Was Samuel Carter really my ancestor? That's what we need to research, Dr. Williams said. What do you know about your family history? Your grandparents, great-grandparents? Just my grandma, Elijah said. Grandma Joyce Carter. She raised me after my mom died when I was 4. She used to tell me stories about soldiers and builders, about people who came to New Mexico a long time ago. But she died when I was 6, and I don't remember everything she said. Nobody else ever talked about family after that. Dr. Williams pulled out her tablet and began searching genealogical databases. Joyce Carter, died around 2022-2023, would have been born around when? I don't know exactly. She was old, like really old. Maybe born in the 1940s? Dr. Williams typed rapidly, cross-referencing census records and birth certificates. There's a Joyce Marie Carter born in 1947 in Santa Fe County, New Mexico. Parents listed as Robert Carter and Alice Morrison. Robert Carter's parents. She scrolled further back. Robert Carter, born 1925. Parents listed as Joseph Carter and Sarah Williams. Joseph Carter, born 1903 in... She stopped, her eyes widening. Joseph Carter, born 1903, listed as son of Samuel Carter and Rosa Martinez Carter. She looked at Elijah, her expression awed. Samuel and Rosa had 3 children according to the 1910 census. 2 boys and a girl. One of those boys was Joseph. If this genealogy is correct, then Samuel Carter was your great-great-great-grandfather. This tin box, these letters, and this medal, they're your family's legacy. Rosa hid them, hoping a descendant would find them. And you did. Elijah felt tears streaming down his face. So they're really mine? I'm really connected to them? You're connected by blood and by story, Dr. Williams confirmed. And Elijah, Rosa wrote about her children being taken from her, scattered to different places. That happened to black families a lot in the early 1900s. Children removed by authorities who claimed their mothers couldn't care for them properly. Just like... She trailed off, looking at him meaningfully. Just like me, Elijah finished. In the system, because they said Grandma was too old to keep raising me after she got sick. She wanted to, but they said she couldn't. Dr. Williams nodded sadly. History repeating itself. Black children being separated from family because the system decides the family isn't appropriate. Your great-great-great-grandmother Rosa experienced it, and now you're experiencing it too. Officer Tafoya had been listening to this conversation while still monitoring the argument between Mr. Stevens and James Rodriguez. Now she spoke up. Mr. Rodriguez, I have a suggestion. There's a foster family on the Pueblo. Experienced, licensed, good people. They've said they could take Elijah on an emergency basis while you sort out a better long-term placement. That would keep him close to where he made this discovery. Close to Dr. Williams, who can help him research his family history, and away from a group home placement that clearly isn't working. You can't just decide to place him with random people, Mr. Stevens protested. They're not random people, Officer Tafoya said coolly. They're licensed foster parents with an excellent track record. And frankly, Mr. Stevens, your facility has lost this child 3 times in 6 months. I'm not comfortable with him going back there tonight. James Rodriguez looked at his tablet. reading through files. The Pueblo family. Are they the Romeros? I've worked with them before. They're good people. He looked at Elijah. Would you be willing to stay with a foster family tonight instead of going back to the group home? Just for tonight, while we figure things out? Elijah looked at the tin box in his lap, at the evidence that he came from people who survived impossible things, who fought for dignity and family. Yes, he said. I'll go. Mr. Stevens started to argue, but Officer Tafoya held up her hand. It's decided. Elijah stays on the Pueblo tonight with the Romeros. CPS will do a full review of his placement and make a longer-term decision. And in the meantime, Dr. Williams will work with Elijah to document his family history and determine what should happen with these artifacts. As the adults made arrangements, Dr. Williams stayed with Elijah. Can I take pictures of the documents? She asked. For preservation and research purposes? The originals will stay with you, but having digital copies means the information is protected even if something happens to the physical documents. Elijah nodded, and Dr. Williams carefully photographed each letter, each photograph, the medal, and Rosa's final message. As she worked, she kept talking to Elijah about what they'd found. Samuel Carter served in the 369th Infantry Regiment, the Harlem Hellfighters. They were one of the most decorated American units in World War I. They fought with the French Army because the American Army was segregated and didn't want black soldiers in combat roles. But the French treated them as equals, and they fought with extraordinary courage. See, she showed Elijah information on her tablet. Photographs of the Hellfighters, accounts of their battles, documentation of their heroism. Your great-great-great-grandfather was part of that, Dr. Williams said. He was a hero. And then he came home to New Mexico, married Rosa, built a life despite all the discrimination and difficulty. That's your legacy, Elijah. That's where you come from. For the first time in 2 years, since his grandmother had died and he'd been placed in the system, Elijah felt like he belonged to something bigger than just himself. He felt connected to a story, a history, a family that had fought and survived. The fragile mud house that had sheltered him from the desert sun had given him something even more valuable than physical refuge. It had given him back his name, his history, his sense of being part of something that mattered. The Romero family lived in a modest adobe house on the Santa Clara Pueblo, with a view of the Jemez Mountains turning purple in the twilight. Teresa Romero was a woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and calloused hands that spoke of hard work. Her husband, Miguel, was quieter, a man who listened more than he spoke, but whose presence felt solid and reassuring. You're safe here, Teresa said simply, as she showed Elijah to a small bedroom. This is just for tonight, maybe a few days while the state figures things out. But while you're here, you're safe. Nobody's going to hurt you or take things from you. Okay? Elijah nodded, still clutching the tin box. He hadn't let it out of his sight since finding it. Teresa noticed. That must be important, what you're holding. It belonged to my great-great-great-grandfather, Elijah said quietly. He was a soldier in World War I. His name was Samuel Carter. Teresa's expression softened. A soldier. That's something to be proud of. She sat down on the edge of the bed. My grandfather fought in World War II. He was Pueblo, and back then, Native Americans weren't even considered citizens yet. But he still fought for this country. He came back with medals and stories and trauma that he never fully healed from. So I understand a little bit about what it means to come from soldiers. Did your grandfather tell you stories? Elijah asked. Some, when he was in a good mood, when the memories weren't too heavy. He told me that being a soldier taught him that courage isn't about not being scared. It's about being scared and doing what needs to be done anyway. She looked at Elijah meaningfully. Kind of like running into the desert when you're 8 years old, because you can't stay in a place that doesn't protect you. That takes courage, too. Over dinner, enchiladas and beans that tasted better than anything Elijah had eaten in months, Miguel asked him about school, about what he liked to do, treating him like a person rather than a problem. Their teenage son, Danny, showed Elijah his collection of arrowheads found around the pueblo, explaining how you could tell the age and origin of different points by their shape and material. It felt normal, safe, like what Elijah imagined family was supposed to feel like before his mom died and his grandmother got sick and the system swallowed him whole. That night, lying in a real bed with clean sheets, Elijah carefully examined every item in the tin box again. He read Samuel's letters by flashlight, learning about training camps in New York, about the journey to France, about battles whose names Elijah didn't recognize, but whose violence came through clearly in Samuel's careful descriptions. "We fight for a country that does not see us as equal," Samuel had written in one letter. "But we fight with honor nonetheless, because our dignity is not dependent on their recognition. We are men. We are soldiers. We are worthy, regardless of what they choose to believe." Elijah thought about those words, about fighting for dignity when the world tried to deny it, about being worthy regardless of recognition. It felt important, like a message sent across a century specifically for him. The next morning, Dr. Williams returned with a colleague, a genealogist named Dr. Robert Chen, who specialized in tracing family histories for people of color in the Southwest. They sat with Elijah at the Romeros' kitchen table, surrounded by laptops and papers and historical records. "We've been researching all night," Dr. Williams said, her eyes bright with excitement and caffeine. "Elijah, your family history is extraordinary. We've traced the Carter line back 5 generations now, and we've found documentation of property ownership, military service, and community involvement throughout New Mexico history." Dr. Chen pulled up a family tree on his laptop. Samuel Carter was born in 1890 in Texas, son of formerly enslaved parents who moved west after Reconstruction. He came to New Mexico in 1915, worked as a ranch hand, then enlisted when America entered World War I. After the war, he used his veterans' benefits to purchase 40 acres of land outside Santa Fe, the land where that adobe house still stands. "He owned the land?" Elijah asked. "The land where I found the box?" "He did. And he built that house with his own hands, using traditional adobe methods he learned from local builders. He and Rosa lived there and raised their 3 children there." Dr. Chen's expression grew somber. But in 1920, Samuel died in the influenza pandemic. And that's when things fell apart. Rosa, as a widow with 3 young children, was deemed unable to provide adequate care by the county authorities. Her children were removed and placed in different institutions and adoptive homes. "They stole them," Elijah said, his voice tight with anger. "Just like Rosa wrote. They stole her children." "Yes," Dr. Williams agreed quietly. That was common practice at the time, especially with Black and Native American families. If a mother was widowed or impoverished, authorities would remove the children, claiming it was for their own good. But really, it was about control and about denying these families the right to stay together. "What happened to Rosa?" Elijah asked. Dr. Chen pulled up another document. "She fought to get her children back. We found legal petitions, letters to various authorities, documentation of her attempts, but she never succeeded. She lived in that adobe house alone until she died in 1945. still trying to find her scattered children until the end. Elijah felt tears burning his eyes. "That's so sad." "It is," Dr. Williams agreed. "But here's what's also true. One of those children, Joseph Carter, your great-great-grandfather, survived the system. He was placed with a family in Albuquerque, and while he never saw his mother Rosa again, he remembered her. He remembered the adobe house. He told his children stories about it, about their grandmother who loved them, about their father who was a war hero. And those stories were passed down through generations until they reached you. And now you've found the physical evidence," Dr. Chen added. "The letters, the medal, Rosa's message. You've reconnected the story that the system tried to break apart." Officer Tafoya arrived mid-morning with James Rodriguez from CPS. They had news, but their expressions suggested it wasn't all good. "Elijah," James said, sitting down at the table. "We've completed our review of your placement at Sunrise Group Home. We've determined it's not an appropriate setting for you, and we won't be sending you back there." Elijah felt relief flood through him. "So where will I go?" "That's the complicated part," James said carefully. "We're looking for a foster placement that can meet your needs, but finding the right match takes time. The Romeros have agreed to keep you for up to 2 weeks while we search, but they can't do long-term placement right now." "Why not?" Elijah asked, looking at Teresa, who smiled sadly. "Because we're getting older, mijo," Teresa said gently. "And we've committed to short-term emergency care, not long-term foster parenting. It's not about you. It's about our own limitations." "However," Officer Tafoya interjected, "there's another development. Dr. Williams and Dr. Chen have discovered something about your family that might change your placement options." Dr. Williams nodded. "Elijah, we found your great-uncle. Samuel and Rosa Carter's son Joseph had 2 children, Robert, who was your great-grandfather, and another son named Thomas. Thomas is still alive. He's 78 years old, living in Albuquerque. And when we contacted him this morning and told him about you and about what you'd found in the adobe house, he said he wants to meet you." Elijah's heart began to race. "I have family? Living family?" "You have a great-great-uncle," Dr. Chen confirmed. "And he has children and grandchildren. Your cousins, technically, though several generations removed. An entire branch of the Carter family that you didn't know about." "And they want to meet me?" Elijah asked, afraid to hope. "They're driving up from Albuquerque today," Dr. Williams said. "Thomas Carter is bringing his daughter, your cousin, several times removed, who happens to be a family law attorney. They want to explore the possibility of kinship placement." James Rodriguez held up his hand. "We need to be clear that this isn't automatic. Even if they're family, they'll need to go through the foster care approval process, background checks, home studies. That takes time." "But it's possible," Elijah pressed. "It's possible," James confirmed. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of nervous anticipation. Elijah showered and put on clean clothes that Teresa had washed for him. He carefully wrapped Samuel's letters and medal back in their cloth and placed them in the tin box. Dr. Williams helped him prepare what to say, how to explain what he'd found, and why it mattered. When the doorbell rang just after noon, Elijah felt his stomach clench with anxiety. Teresa answered the door, and Elijah heard voices. An older man, a younger woman, the sounds of introductions being made. Then Teresa called him. "Elijah, your family is here." He walked into the living room and saw them. An elderly black man with white hair and a cane, standing tall despite his age, his face lined with decades of living, but his eyes sharp and bright. Beside him was a woman in her 40s, professional-looking, with Samuel Carter's same serious expression in the photographs. The old man stared at Elijah for a long moment, tears streaming down his face. "My God," he whispered. "You look just like my Uncle Robert did at your age. Just like him." He moved forward slowly, leaning on his cane, and knelt down with difficulty so he was at Elijah's eye level. "My name is Thomas Carter. My father was Joseph Carter, son of Samuel and Rosa Carter, which makes you my great-great-nephew, which makes you family." "I found your grandfather's letters," Elijah said quietly, holding up the tin box. "And your grandmother Rosa's message. She hid them in the adobe house, hoping family would find them someday." Thomas's hands trembled as he accepted the box. He opened it slowly, looking at contents he'd never seen, but had heard stories about his whole life. His father Joseph had told him about Rosa hiding family treasures, about the adobe house that was taken by the county after Rosa died, about legacy that was scattered and lost. "She waited," Thomas said, his voice breaking. "My grandmother Rosa waited in that house for 40 years, hoping her children would come back. My father tried to find her after he grew up, but by the time he located the house, she'd already died. And he never knew about these letters, this message she left. He died believing his mother's voice was lost forever." He looked at Elijah with an expression of wonder and grief and joy all mixed together. "But you found it. You found her voice. You brought our family's story back into the light." The woman, Thomas's daughter Angela, knelt beside her father. "Elijah, I'm an attorney specializing in family law. And what I'm going to tell you is this. My father has been alone since my mother died last year. His house is too big for one person. He has resources, stability, and most importantly, he has love to give. If you're willing, and if the state approves, we'd like to bring you home. We'd like you to be part of our family, where you belong." Elijah looked at this old man who shared his blood, this cousin who was offering him something he'd stopped believing was possible. "But you don't know me," he said. "I'm in foster care because I don't have anyone. I'm a problem kid who runs away. Why would you want me?" Thomas reached out and took Elijah's hand. "Because you're not a problem child. You're family. You're a Carter. And Carters take care of their own. That's what my father taught me, even though his own family was stolen from him. He never stopped believing that family mattered, that blood meant something, that we had an obligation to each other." He squeezed Elijah's hand gently. "You found your way back to us, just like Rosa hoped someone would. Now let us bring you the rest of the way home." The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of paperwork, home visits, and cautious hope. Elijah stayed with the Romeros while the state conducted background checks on Thomas Carter and performed a home study of his house in Albuquerque's North Valley neighborhood. Thomas visited every other day, driving the hour from Albuquerque to Santa Clara Pueblo to spend time with Elijah, slowly building a relationship with the great-great-nephew he'd never known existed. Thomas brought photographs, boxes and boxes of them, spanning generations of Carter family history. He showed Elijah pictures of Joseph Carter, the little boy who had been taken from Rosa and placed in an orphanage, but who had survived, thrived, and built a life despite the trauma. Pictures of Joseph's wedding, his children, his grandchildren, an entire family tree that Elijah was part of but had never known about. "Your grandmother Joyce was my cousin," Thomas explained one afternoon as they sat at the Romeros' kitchen table, sorting through old photographs. "Robert's daughter. We used to see each other at family reunions when we were young, but we lost touch as adults. You know how families drift apart sometimes. I didn't even know she'd died until Dr. Williams contacted me. Didn't know about you at all." "Why did we lose touch?" Elijah asked. "Why didn't Grandma Joyce stay connected to the family?" Thomas sighed. "That's complicated. Your grandmother had a hard life. Your grandfather, Joyce's husband, your mother's father, he was not a good man. Violent, mean. Joyce left him when your mother was young, and she kind of withdrew from family after that. Shame, probably, or just exhaustion from surviving. And I was dealing with my own life, raising kids, building a career. I didn't reach out like I should have." His voice filled with regret. "That's on me. I should have tried harder to maintain those connections." "But you're here now," Elijah said quietly. "I'm here now," Thomas agreed, "and I'm not going anywhere. Whatever happens with the custody situation, you're part of this family now. You know about us, and we know about you, and that connection doesn't break just because of bureaucracy or paperwork." Dr. Williams continued her research, using the letters and documents from the tin box to piece together the full story of the Carter family's time in New Mexico. She discovered that Samuel Carter's 40 acres had been seized by the county after Rosa's death for unpaid property taxes. Taxes that Rosa had actually paid, but for which the county claimed to have no record. It's the same pattern we see over and over, Dr. Williams explained during one of her visits. Black landowners making their payments, but the payments being lost or not properly recorded. Then the land gets seized and sold, usually to white buyers for a fraction of its value. She showed Elijah and Thomas documents she'd found in the county archives: foreclosure notices, tax seizure records, a bill of sale showing the Carter 40 acres being sold in 1946 for $200 to a developer who later subdivided it into smaller plots. That land would be worth millions today, Angela Carter said, examining the documents with a lawyer's eye. The property is now part of a residential development, 40 acres in that location. With current real estate values, she calculated quickly, easily $15 to $20 million. So our family was robbed, Elijah said flatly. Yes, Angela confirmed, systematically and deliberately robbed. And while we can't get the physical land back after nearly 80 years, we might be able to pursue a claim for compensation, or at least formal acknowledgement of the theft. But not everyone was happy about the Carter family's rediscovery of their history. Mr. Stevens from the group home filed a complaint claiming that Elijah had damaged property during his escape, broken windows and doors, and that the Carter family should be responsible for restitution. The complaint was quickly dismissed as absurd, but it revealed the bitterness of someone who had been exposed as negligent. More concerning was a letter that arrived at Thomas's house, forwarded through his lawyer. It was from a law firm representing the current owners of the subdivision built on Samuel Carter's 40 acres. The letter stated that the firm had concerns about unfounded historical claims and warned that any public statements about land theft or illegal seizure would be considered defamatory. "They're trying to intimidate us," Angela said, reading the letter with barely contained anger. "They're worried that acknowledging what happened to your great-great-great-grandparents might expose them to legal liability or public backlash." "Can they stop us from telling the truth?" Elijah asked. "No," Angela said firmly. "The truth is a defense against defamation, and the historical record supports everything we're saying. They can threaten all they want, but if we have documentation, which we do, thanks to Rosa and Samuel's foresight, they have no case." Dr. Williams went further, publishing a preliminary article in a historical journal about the Carter family's experience as part of a broader pattern of black land dispossession in New Mexico. The article included photographs of Samuel's letters and Rosa's message, properly preserved and documented. The response from the academic community was immediate and supportive. Other historians chimed in with similar cases they documented, creating a groundswell of interest in this hidden history. The local news picked up the story. 8-year-old's desert discovery reveals century of family separation and land theft. Reporters wanted to interview Elijah, to photograph him at the adobe house, to turn his discovery into a feel-good human interest story. Thomas was protective. "Elijah's been through enough," he told the reporters who called. "He's not a curiosity or a photo opportunity. He's a child who deserves privacy and stability." But Elijah surprised everyone by saying he wanted to do one interview. "If telling my story helps other kids in foster care understand they come from somewhere, that they have history and family even if they don't know about it yet, then I want to tell it." The interview was conducted by a journalist from the Santa Fe, New Mexican, a woman named Patricia Gonzalez, who had herself been in foster care as a child. She interviewed Elijah at the adobe house, with Thomas present for support. "Why did you run away that day?" Patricia asked gently. "Because nobody at the group home cared about me," Elijah said honestly. "I was just a number, just another problem kid. When I got in trouble, nobody asked why or what happened. They just said I was bad and needed to be controlled. So I ran because I'd rather die free in the desert than live like that." That's a hard thing for an 8-year-old to feel. "It's a hard thing to be 8 years old with nobody who loves you," Elijah replied. "But then I found this house, and I found my family's letters, and I learned that I came from people who fought to stay together, who believed family mattered. And that changed everything." How did it change things? "Because I wasn't alone anymore. Even though Samuel and Rosa died a long time ago, their words made me feel like I was part of something. Like I mattered because they mattered. And then Dr. Williams found Uncle Thomas, and I learned I had real family, living family, who wanted me." Elijah looked at Thomas, who was crying quietly. "I learned that sometimes you have to run away to find your way home." The custody hearing was scheduled for a Wednesday morning in late October. Elijah wore clothes that Angela had bought him, nice pants and a button-down shirt that actually fit, shoes that didn't hurt his feet. He sat between Thomas and Angela in the courtroom, with Dr. Williams, Officer Tafoya, and the Romeros there for support. The judge was a Latina woman in her 50s who read through the case file carefully before speaking. "Mr. Carter, you're requesting permanent custody of your great-great-nephew, Elijah. You're 78 years old. The state typically prefers younger foster parents. Can you explain why you believe you're the appropriate placement, despite your age?" Thomas stood, leaning on his cane but speaking with strength. "Your Honor, I'm asking for custody because Elijah is family. He's blood. And in the Carter family, we don't abandon our own. We've had too much of that already. My father was stolen from his mother when he was 4 years old and never saw her again. My cousin Joyce, Elijah's grandmother, lost touch with family and ended up raising children alone without support. Elijah has been in the system for 2 years, bouncing between placements where nobody really wanted him. That cycle of separation and loss ends now. I'm 78, yes, but I'm healthy. I'm financially stable. I have family support from my daughter and grandchildren, and most importantly, I love this child. He belongs with us." The judge turned to Elijah. "Young man, do you want to live with your Uncle Thomas?" "Yes, ma'am," Elijah said clearly. "I want to be with family. Real family, who knows where I come from and who I am. And if I grant this custody, Do you promise to work with your uncle? To follow rules? Go to school? Not run away when things get hard? Elijah thought about that. I promise to try. But I also need Uncle Thomas to promise that if something's wrong, if something's not working, we'll talk about it instead of just sending me away like all the other places did. Because I ran away before, because nobody listened when I said things were bad. The judge looked at Thomas. Can you make that promise, Mr. Carter? Absolutely, Your Honor. In our family, we talk. We work through problems. We don't give up on each other. The judge nodded slowly, writing notes. I've reviewed the home study. I've reviewed Mr. Carter's background check and financial records. I've read the letters of support from family members and from Dr. Williams regarding the historical significance of Elijah's connection to the Carter family legacy. And I've read Elijah's case file, including documentation of 3 escape attempts from institutional care settings. She paused, looking directly at Elijah. Young man, you've had a harder life than any 8-year-old should have to endure. The system has failed you repeatedly. But today, we're going to try to do right by you. She turned to her computer and began typing. I'm granting permanent custody of Elijah Carter to Thomas Carter, with the understanding that Angela Carter and other family members are available for support. I'm also ordering that the state provide trauma-informed counseling for Elijah to help him process his experiences in foster care and adjust to this new placement. And finally, she looked at James Rodriguez from CPS. I'm ordering a review of how Mr. Carter's custody petitions were handled over the past 2 weeks. If there's evidence that family reunification was deliberately delayed or obstructed, I want to know about it. She banged her gavel. Custody granted. Welcome home, Elijah. 4 months after Elijah Carter found refuge in a crumbling adobe house and discovered his family's hidden legacy, he stood in that same structure, now stabilized and protected as a historic site. The New Mexico Historic Preservation Division had designated it as the Carter Rosa Adobe, recognizing both Samuel and Rosa's contributions to New Mexico history. The house had been carefully preserved. Structural engineers had stabilized the walls, replaced the roof using traditional methods, and protected the building from further deterioration. But they had kept its essential character, the small size, the hand-built quality, the niche where Rosa had hidden her treasures, and they had added a small plaque beside the doorway. Built 1916 by Samuel Carter, veteran of the 369th Infantry Regiment, Harlem Hellfighters, WWI, home to Samuel and Rosa Carter and their children until 1920, site where family documents were hidden by Rosa Carter and rediscovered by her great-great-great-grandson, Elijah Carter, in 2024. This building stands as testimony to Black homesteading in New Mexico and to the resilience of families separated by systemic injustice. Today was the dedication ceremony. More than 100 people had gathered: historians, local officials, members of veterans organizations, and, most importantly, Carter family members. Thomas had reached out to every Carter cousin he could find, and they had come from across the Southwest to witness this moment. Elijah stood with Uncle Thomas, both of them wearing suits for the occasion. Thomas leaned on his cane but stood tall, his hand resting on Elijah's shoulder. Dr. Williams was there, having helped organize the ceremony. Officer Tafoya had come from the Pueblo. Even the Romeros were present, Teresa crying happy tears at seeing Elijah so clearly thriving. The ceremony began with a blessing from a local elder, followed by remarks from the Historic Preservation Division Director about the significance of the site. Then Dr. Williams spoke about her research into Black homesteading in New Mexico, about how the Carter family's story had opened up new understanding of this hidden history. For too long, Dr. Williams said, we've told the story of the American West as primarily white or Native American. But black families were here too, homesteading, building, creating communities. Most of their stories were lost because their documents were destroyed or their land was stolen. The Carter family is one of the lucky ones. Thanks to Rosa's foresight in hiding these papers, and thanks to Elijah's courage in bringing them to light, we can now tell their story. And through their story, we can begin to tell all the stories that were almost lost. Then it was Elijah's turn to speak. He was nervous. There were so many people watching, but Uncle Thomas had helped him prepare, and he had something important to say. "When I found this house 4 months ago," Elijah began, his voice small at first, but growing stronger, "I was running away from a group home where nobody cared about me. I was alone and scared, and I thought maybe I'd just die in the desert, because at least that would be my choice instead of someone else's decision." He paused, looking at the faces watching him. Family faces, kind faces, faces that cared what happened to him. "But I found this house, and inside it, I found a box that my great-great-great-grandmother Rosa had hidden. She hid letters from her husband Samuel, who was a war hero. She hid his medal and photographs and a message. And in that message, she talked about how her children were taken from her, stolen by people who said she couldn't take care of them. She hid those documents hoping that someday one of her family would find them and know that she had loved them, that she had fought for them, that they came from people who mattered." Elijah felt tears on his face, but kept talking. "I was in foster care because people said my grandma was too old to keep taking care of me. Just like they took Rosa's children because she was a widow. The same thing, just 90 years apart. But Rosa's story helped me understand that I wasn't just a throwaway kid. I came from warriors and survivors. I came from people who built homes with their own hands and fought for their families even when the law said they didn't matter." He looked at Uncle Thomas. "And finding those papers led me to Uncle Thomas, who I didn't even know existed, who's been looking for family connections just like I was looking for somewhere to belong. We found each other because Rosa believed that family mattered enough to hide the proof, to preserve the truth, to hope that someday someone would care." His voice grew firmer. "So I want to say thank you to Rosa and Samuel Carter. Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for believing your story mattered. And I want to say to other kids in foster care, kids who feel like I felt, like nobody wants them or cares about them, you come from somewhere. You have a story. You have ancestors who survived impossible things. You matter, even when the system makes you feel like you don't. And maybe, if you're lucky like I was, you'll find your way back to family. Back to people who will fight for you the way Rosa fought for her children. The way Uncle Thomas fought to bring me home." The applause was long and genuine. But what meant the most to Elijah were the faces of the other foster children in the audience. Kids who had been brought by their social workers to witness this ceremony, to see that stories like Elijah's were possible. After the ceremony, people approached Elijah, descendants of other black homesteader families sharing their own stories of lost land and separated families, historians asking questions about the documents, journalists requesting follow-up interviews. But the most meaningful conversation was with a girl about his age who hung back until almost everyone else had left. "I'm in foster care too," she said quietly. "4th placement. Nobody wants to keep me because I have too many problems, but hearing your story, it made me think maybe I'm not just broken. Maybe I come from somewhere too. Maybe I have a story, even if I don't know what it is yet." Elijah looked at this girl who reminded him so much of himself just months ago. "You do have a story," he said with certainty, "and you're not broken. The system is broken. But you're strong because you're still here, still fighting, still looking for where you belong. That's not broken. That's survival." The girl smiled, a small, tentative smile, and walked away looking just a little bit taller, a little bit more hopeful. That evening, back at Uncle Thomas's house in Albuquerque, Elijah sat in what had become his favorite spot, the window seat in his bedroom that looked out at the Sandia Mountains. The tin box sat on his desk, its contents now protected in archival sleeves, but still accessible whenever he wanted to hold a physical connection to his ancestors. Uncle Thomas knocked gently on the doorframe. "You did good today. Your great-great-great-grandparents would be proud." "Do you think Rosa ever imagined this?" Elijah asked. "That hiding those papers would lead to all this? The historic site? The research? Finding family?" Thomas settled into the chair by Elijah's desk. "I think Rosa imagined exactly this. Maybe not the specific details, but the essence of it. Family finding family, truth being told, love surviving across generations. That's what she was hoping for when she wrote that message. That's what Samuel was hoping for when he served with honor despite being treated as less than equal. They believed that their dignity, their story, their love for their children mattered. And they were right." "I'm glad I ran away that day," Elijah said quietly, "even though I could have died in the desert, even though it was dangerous and scary. Because if I hadn't run, I wouldn't have found the house. I wouldn't have found the papers. I wouldn't have found you." Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is run toward the unknown when the known is unbearable, Thomas said. "You trusted your instinct that something better existed, even when you had no proof. That's courage." Over the following months, Elijah settled into a life that felt almost miraculous compared to where he'd been. He attended a good school where his teacher knew his story and understood that kids who'd been through trauma sometimes needed patience and flexibility. He made friends, real friends who came over to play and invited him to their houses. He joined a youth group at church where other kids accepted him without judgment. And every month, he returned to the adobe house with Uncle Thomas. Sometimes just the two of them, sometimes with other family members. They would stand in the small structure that Samuel had built with his own hands, and they would tell stories. Stories about Samuel and Rosa, about Joseph and the children who were stolen, about Joyce and Elijah's mother, about all the generations that connected them across time. Dr. Williams used the Carter family's story as the foundation for a larger research project documenting Black homesteaders throughout New Mexico. She found dozens of similar cases, families who had owned land, paid their taxes, and then been systematically dispossessed through fraud, violence, or legal manipulation. Each story she uncovered was another piece of hidden history brought back to light. And Elijah became something unexpected, an advocate. He spoke at foster care conferences about the importance of family connections. He talked to social workers about how trauma makes kids run, not because they're bad, but because they're trying to survive. He reminded audiences that behind every problem child was a story, a history, a human being who deserved dignity and connection. On the first anniversary of finding the tin box, Elijah returned to the adobe house one more time. This time, he came alone. Uncle Thomas waited in the car, giving Elijah space for a private moment. Elijah stood in the restored structure, in the exact spot where he had collapsed in exhaustion a year ago, desperate and alone, and running out of hope. "Thank you," he whispered to the ancestors he'd never met, but felt deeply connected to. "Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for hiding the truth. Thank you for believing that someday someone would care enough to find it. He placed his hand on the wall where the niche had been, where Rosa had hidden her treasures behind mud plaster and prayers. I found it. I found you. And I made sure everyone knows you were here, that you built this, that you mattered. Your story isn't lost anymore. Your family isn't scattered anymore. We found each other again. As Elijah walked back to Uncle Thomas's car, the desert wind moved through the sage, carrying the scent of rain from distant mountains. The fragile mud house stood behind him, no longer abandoned or forgotten, but preserved and honored. A monument to survival, to family, to the power of hope surviving across generations. He had come to that house looking for nothing more than shelter from the desert sun. And he had found everything: history, family, purpose, and proof that even the most fragile structures, whether built of mud or hope, could survive impossible things if someone believed they were worth preserving. Would you like to see the continuation of this story and uncover the other secrets hidden in these lands? Leave a comment, share this video, and stay tuned, because the next mystery may be even bigger.